Welcome back to another live and amplified indie fusion podcast. I'm your host, Tom Quiet, and we are back at it again with another amazing podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, a rescheduled guest on my bad. We were supposed to do this originally Friday, but as most of you know, I got severe heat stroke on Friday and I fell asleep and was asleep for about 18 hours afterwards. So I completely slipped through our podcast. Luckily, we were able to get this guy rescheduled. We got Ben went west. How's it going today, man?
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you still talked to me afterwards because I
Yeah,
was sick.
no, it's
I
honestly, I was just kind of worried because like you and I had been texting back and forth and
Yeah,
just chatting away and stuff, and then you went radio silent. I was like, oh man, I hope genuinely he's
yeah.
okay.
I appreciate. So basically, what had happened was the original plan for Friday was I had to work and I knew we had like this golf tournament thing that we were sponsoring, but the
Hmm.
original thing was I was just going to go out there, make an appearance for like lunch and just kind of like shake some hand, do like the political
Yeah,
thing, right?
yeah. Rub some
And
elbows and yeah.
yeah, that sort of thing. And so then I get a call Thursday afternoon from my boss and she's like, "Hey, that golf tournament tomorrow, they pulled our entire team and now we need to refill it. Can you come in and play?" And I'm like, I I haven't played golf in 15 years, but let me see what I can do. And so then push comes to shove, I get out there and I was like hoping it was like the morning shift and it was like no, it's the afternoon shift and it's like 1 p.m. in October in Texas. That's an absolute nightmare.
I get
And
it.
I made it about 9 holes before my skin was beet red and I came home. I was supposed to go to Dallas to go do another podcast with a musician I met out in
Hmm.
Nashville, and then I was going to come back and do our thing.
Yeah.
I didn't even make it to Dallas. I just kind of laid down for 10 minutes and then it ended up being like 18 hours later. So,
Yeah, you know you've done a number on yourself when your body is like, no, we're in hibernation mode for a
right.
moment now.
Right. I rolled over at like 3 a.m. and I was on the couch and like my skin was stuck to the fake leather couch that I have. And it was just like, yeah, I think I'm gonna just stay right here. I ain't moving because this hurts just to move. So I'm right here. So, but
I'm
how's every?
sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
My
Oh,
weekend was less intense than that, thankfully.
right,
So
right. Um, but I really appreciate you being here. You seem to have been very busy because you reached out to me about was it about a month ago at this point?
yeah, probably. It's probably roundabout that. The last 6 weeks or so have been a blur because honestly,
Mm,
those couple of weeks running up to the record coming out, and
mm,
then I don't quite know when this is going out, but yeah, the record's been out for about a month, so it really there was a bunch of sort of promo running up to it, and then sort of I'm now in the full throes of trying to pimp this thing out. So it's
right.
yeah, it's been a pretty intense. Couple of weeks for sure, and a lot of
Oh,
traveling as well for my actual day job too. So it's kind of between the two things. It's yeah. Funnily enough, I was in Nashville for like 7 days right after I released the record, and it was yeah, it was just it was pretty intense. I kind of came back up for air about a week ago and was like, oh
right.
wow, some time has elapsed.
Right. So how long is this? This is your debut EP. How long has this kind of been in the works?
So that's an interesting question. So technically, this has been a record of some sort has been in the works since mid to late 2020. So like a lot of people, during during 2020, I found myself grounded for the first time in a long
Hmm.
time. So the quick backstory. So I'm my day job. I'm a photographer, and a lot of the work that I do is in the music industry.
Nice.
So for the first time in over 10 years, I didn't have a plane or a train to catch. I was still living in the UK at that point. This was before moving permanently to California. And yeah, I was stuck in an apartment surrounded by guitars or whatever. And like a lot of white dudes surrounded by guitars, like all of a sudden I started writing songs for the first time in about yeah, in about 11 or 12 years at that point. I'd been in a couple of bands when I was younger and stuff, and I had written in those bands. I didn't front any of those. Like I was a writer, and I saw
Mhm.
myself as the sort of the second guy, as it were. I was the middle of the road guitar player, but I was writing a lot of those songs. But no, yeah, 2020 came around. I had a ton of time on my hands, and it kind of happened fairly organically, really. Honestly, I think I just maybe hadn't given that part of my brain the time or sort of energy it deserved
Mhm.
to sort of to kind of use those muscles. And to be perfectly honest, I was kind of more impressed initially that, oh, actually, I guess I can still do this. I didn't know if it had been genuinely so long since I didn't know if that muscle had atrophied or whatever.
Right.
I really hadn't sort of put too much emphasis on it. But music's been a part of my life, like honestly, like pretty much from sort of yeah, a fairly early age. And in a lot of ways, music was what kind of actually sent me down the photography road in a more of a
Mhm.
serious sense. Because when I was younger, I realized I was having more fun photographing the other bands that we were around at the time and playing with and all that kind of stuff than I actually did playing very
Mhm.
average middle of the road guitar in a middle of the road indie band. So it was that kind of sent me on this trajectory of like, well, wait a minute, somebody gets paid to take these pictures that are in these magazines, right? And it was that light bulb moment of, well, if I work hard enough, then why shouldn't that be me?
Yeah.
And sure enough, more than 10 years of doing this full time, like, yeah, here we are. But coming full circle, like all of a sudden I had this downtime from doing what had kept me so busy. And I kind of gravitated back towards the songwriting. And there's a couple of songs on this record that came out of that first sort of month's worth of starting to write again.
Mhm.
The song that opens the record, The Last Place You Thought of As Home, like that was one of those songs from that batch. And so was the Santa Ana Winds. That was those two were in that initial flurry of productivity. And I was sort of like I said, I was living alone at that point. My fiance, now wife,
Yeah.
was over here in the US, and we were kind of an ocean apart. My family were living hundreds of miles away from where I was at that point and stuff. And I was really sort of my days were kind of going outside and taking a walk and trying not to go insane, and then coming home and sitting there with the guitar and
Yeah.
figuring out these songs. And honestly, I was showing them to yeah, my good friend Scott Sebring, who ended up producing this record. He's an artist in his own right,
Yeah.
and he's yeah, he was like a studio cat in the 90s or whatever, and worked on a bunch of great records in the LA area and stuff. And yeah, he heard these songs, and between the two of us, the conversation turned into, so what are you going to do with these? Are we going to make a record? And
Right.
sure enough, here we are in 2024, and I'm finally putting this damn thing out.
Hey, fair enough. It takes time, right? Yeah,
It does.
especially
It really does.
coming up in a time like the pandemic. Studio time wasn't that prevalent unless you knew
Right.
a guy that knew a guy that knew a guy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Or
it. I mean,
yeah,
we didn't actually cut any tracks, I think, in the end until it was almost like the longest pre-production you could imagine
yeah,
because we were really trying to figure out, okay, what is actually happening? And obviously
yeah,
this isn't there is no urgency for this, but it was more a case of, well, we've both got the time to concentrate on this. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And so 2020, you were still out in the UK?
Yeah, that's right. So I was in the middle of so my wife is from here in California,
Hmm.
and yeah, she and I we've been together for about 6 years now, and we getting married and going through the immigration process in the middle of the pandemic was pretty wild as
Yeah.
far as sort of yeah, I can't even begin to tell you how
Hmm.
much paperwork we did and how slow that was in comparison to the usual slow wheels of government and all of that kind of
Yep.
stuff. So I finally got to move out. I got my working visa back in place by the probably by the late summer of 2021. I actually
Hmm.
came back out here to go on tour with an artist that my wife and I were working with at the time in our day job sense. And yeah, and I think but and then I think yeah, the very beginning of yeah, January 2022, I moved to California permanently at that point. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I remember during the pandemic talking to a few different people that were in similar situations
Hmm.
where they were in America and their loved one was out in the UK and they were trying to get
Yeah.
out to England or whatever, and vice versa, kind of like in your situation. And
Yeah, it was trickier coming here, and that was the weird part. Was so
hmm
that first week in March in 2020, Sydney, my wife and I, we had been in Nashville that week, and we'd
hmm
had this great time, and we were starting to hear people talking about this thing that was starting to happen, and we were both flying home respectively. At that point, she was
hmm
flying back to LAX, and I was flying back to Heathrow.
yeah.
And we were sat in departures watching the TV news as it was kind of
hmm
sort of there was a press conference that was happening, and I got the alert on my phone that South by Southwest was being cancelled. And that was kind of like the
yeah.
harbinger of what was to come. Like
hmm
all of the other stuff that was in our diaries
Yep.
kind of just the dominoes kind of fell.
Oh yeah.
And by the time I'd flown home, like that's not a long flight, particularly. It's like
hmm
7 hours or 8 hours from Nashville to
Yeah.
London. And by the time I landed and turned my cell phone back on, it was just ding ding ding, this has been cancelled, this has been cancelled. i
Yep.
did i did a shoot the following day with an artist who I was set to be doing some work with in London,
hmm
and we did that shoot on the proviso that okay, everybody seems to be healthy and whatever, and honestly towards the end of that another 24-hour period, everybody was like, okay, this is right, we're calling this is it now, like, and
Yeah.
yeah, so it was, yeah, if only I'd stayed. If I'd stayed 2 days longer, I probably would have ended up riding the whole thing out here rather than
Right.
because yeah, the border's
And
closed and all the rest
it
of
would have
it.
been
Yeah.
a situation where there was nothing they could do. So
Right, yeah, that's it. That's totally
yeah.
it. But funnily enough though, like, and a couple of people have kind of asked me this, just even friends when they were starting to hear some of these songs. I
hmm
was kind of having to emphasize to people that although I started to write some of this record during that time period, I really wasn't writing about 2020 and what was going on in the
hmm
world. I kind of finally started to unpack some of the stuff that had been going on in my life in the years running up to that, because I'd
hmm
finally taken this beat and taken this breath. I realized I mean, I didn't sit down to intentionally write about anything, but the themes that were starting to come up and the stuff that
hmm
was, I turned 30 in that time period, and sort of quite a few just random things had happened on the timeline kind of in my
Yeah.
life. Like my parents had kind of retired and they had actually sold like the house that my sister and I had grown up in and stuff, and they'd moved on with their life. And there was just all these kind of random moments that were happening in the run up to then everybody going through something collectively. And yeah, and I think the kind of the songs ended up just being more so me trying to just make sense of the things that happened up to that point. I'm not
Yeah.
I wasn't an intelligent or astute enough person to unpack what was going on in the world at that moment, but I definitely sort of benefited from, yeah, I lost a lot of work, but I also benefited from gaining the time that it allowed me, because I really don't know if that hadn't have happened the way it did. I don't honestly know. I can't sit here and say, yes, I would be having this conversation with you now about a
Yeah.
record that I got to make and came out and all of that good stuff.
For sure. For sure. And is this kind of where the whole like name Ben went west? Because obviously that's very literal in a lot of ways. You moved to the
It,
Western United
yeah.
States. Is
So
good.
it's all of the above, really. So it's kind of a joke on my part. So yes, there is the literal,
Yeah.
yeah, I moved 5,000 miles west from where I grew up, but also in the UK. And I'm not sure, I've said it to a couple of people here, and some people got it and some people didn't, but there's kind of a euphemism to describe somebody as going west kind of
Yeah.
means that they went nuts and that they lost their mind and whatnot. So it's kind
Yeah.
of it's kind of all of those things. It's kind of
Uh,
me putting my tongue in cheek, but honestly, it was born out of the fact that like I wanted to put this out, and even though I didn't have, there's full band arrangements on this record, but I don't have
mm,
a permanent band at the moment per se. But I kind of wanted to put it out under a project title as opposed to just under my actual name, just to
yeah.
sort of try and keep the streams of the various stuff that I do
Yeah.
kind of separate. So yeah, I kind of when I was going through like, what would be a fun name, I kind of landed on that quite quickly, and I don't really know where it came from, but I
Yeah.
liked the kind of the alliteration, and it kind of just stuck really. There's a lot of people who do think I'm actually called Ben West though, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
I had one promoter recently who, on the first draft of the flyer that they sent me for the show, I was like, I don't know who Ben West is, but am I playing before him or after him? What's the deal with that? And they were like, Oh, I see. It was one of those like maybe hadn't said it out loud before, maybe,
Yeah,
and then just assumed, okay, this is just a fun thing that he's doing.
yeah,
But yeah, there isn't anything
that's
super deep to it. It really was like, okay, I needed a moniker, and it tickled me, it amused me, and when I started
fair.
scribbling it down on the page, which is kind of what became the logo in the end,
Mhm.
I was like, okay, I kind of like how this works, right?
Yeah, I picked that up or picked that up on the album or the cover art or
Hmm.
the art on the songs. It looked
Yeah.
like you kind of scribbled it down, but it looks cool. Like it gives it character.
It does, yeah, it does. That in itself actually is a really kind of subtle wink to an album that was really important to me growing. So
Hmm.
I grew up in the 90s in the UK, and at that point, what we called Britpop was a really big
Yeah.
deal. And Oasis's debut album, definitely,
Hmm.
maybe the title for that record was in this handwritten
Yep.
kind of. I at one point I used to know whose handwriting that was or whatever. I was that much of a fanboy back then, but no, I'd always had this thing in my head of like, when I get to finally put a record out, there's a lot of nods and winks throughout this whole thing to a bunch of the stuff that has
Hmm.
kind of yeah, factored into my tastes over time. So yeah.
I I've never had anybody bring up Britpop from or the 90s because it's
Hmm.
like you know, as soon as you said that and you said Oasis, and I was like, yep, that there
You were
was a
gonna see
weird
that cover and be like, okay, yeah, I see this now.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's that and then just like all the random bands that kind of crossed over from the UK into the
Yeah.
US, like BB Mac had a really big run here back in
Right.
the
Yeah.
day. And
Yeah.
yeah, so
It's kind of funny really because yeah, like I mean growing up in the UK, like I mean I grew up on a pretty steady diet of all of the incredible classic rock that we
mhm,
had at that point. You know what I mean? Like the
mhm,
Beatles and
yeah.
Led Zeppelin, Bowie, like all of that stuff was kind of just ubiquitous. Like it was just part of the fabric of like you just knew these songs, right? Like
Hmm.
I can't tell you when I became aware of any of that music, it was just always there.
Yeah.
But I got to a point in my as a teenager where I was I was probably about 14 years old, probably about to
Yeah.
turn 15. And I heard Bruce Springsteen's Darkness on the Edge of Town album for the first time. And
Hmm.
that was just one of these light bulb moments. I was like, what is this
Yeah.
music? That was kind of like my doorway to American music, essentially.
Yeah.
Like it really was like this kind of fork in the road where I was
Yeah.
just all of a sudden, yeah, just fascinated by the writing, and I was fascinated by these guitar sounds and stuff. And that led me to Neil Young and to Tom Petty and to I already liked Bob Dylan, and that was definitely
Yeah.
probably the lubricant for all of it. But that kind of was what sent me into that sort of yeah, into that sort of that roots rock Americana kind of world. And yeah, and somewhere between that and the Britpop stuff is kind of where I think
Hmm.
my sound has kind of landed. It's kind
Nice.
of in my mind the best of both of those things put through
Yeah.
my lens and my filter at that point.
It's almost like the writing style of that Americana style, but it's got a little bit of a fuller sound that you would kind of expect in a pop song.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I appreciate you saying that actually, because that was yeah, I very intentionally from the get-go, even though had sat there and I write on guitar for the most part, maybe 80% of the
Yeah.
time it's acoustic guitar, but I do write on electric a little bit. But
Yeah.
my friend Scott, who produced the album, Scott Sebring, said to me, he was like, is this a record of you doing the singer-songwriter thing, or are
Yeah.
we going to do full band arrangements? And I said to him, I was like, if you will bear with me through this process of figuring this out, I was like, I would love to make this a full band record.
Yeah.
This really was this kind of bucket list, wish fulfillment kind of thing that kept me going through an otherwise fairly unpredictable and kind of bizarre time that we're all living through, and sort of
For
getting
sure.
to start thinking about, okay, what is the groove gonna be like on these songs, and thinking about the kind of drums and whatnot. And so yeah, in my mind very quickly I got attached to this idea that
Hmm.
okay, this is gonna sound like a band right at this
Yeah.
point, and that became pretty central to the idea.
Yeah. What I love right now, and you could chime in on this, I'm sure, is obviously there was a lot of like really big UK bands back in the day, the
Hmm.
Beatles, you know, like
Yeah.
all those bands, and then it felt like there was a little bit of a lull, or and now we're kind of back at that point where a lot of these British bands are starting to cross back over, like you know, I mean, it's a little bit different because it's like Adele, Ed Sheeran, and people like that. But then you're also seeing like non-traditional UK genres, like hip hop is really starting to have an influence. You're starting to see a
Yeah.
lot more country artists come over, and there's a lot of really good rock bands over in the UK that are
Yeah.
starting to make some noise, but they're just not like, because rock music isn't as culturally relevant as it used to be.
No, no, definitely. I think that's a really interesting point. I don't totally subscribe to the idea of, I don't know, the music press really likes to use the phrase guitar music, and I don't
Yeah.
know what that means. Music is music,
Okay.
right? Like, yes,
Yeah.
there are genres within stuff, but guitar isn't a genre. Guitar is an
Yeah.
instrument. The
Yeah.
same way in which when people are like, oh, I love this two-piece music, it's like, what does that
What
mean?
is,
Like,
yeah.
the number of band members should not be dictating the genre of this music.
Yeah.
Like, you're missing the point significantly at
Right.
that stage. But no, no, I hear what you're saying. Like I think we're at an interesting stage where like yeah, like for a minute there, like it was very, I mean it still is. It's super expensive for a bunch of teenagers like I was
Hmm.
at one point to get together in a room and to afford a rental space and to be able to afford to get there and to be able to afford to move all their gear around and stuff. And so I think the rise of the whole bedroom producer thing coincided with the technology. Was anybody could buy a lap, you could
Yep.
buy like a $400 laptop and you
Yep.
could sit there with a version of something you downloaded from the internet and a set of headphones and
Yeah.
start making stuff, right?
Oh yeah.
And in some ways that's kind of a beautiful thing, but we did there for a moment convince ourselves culturally that okay, well, we've moved on from the idea of like a traditional band and whatever, and it's like everything, there's a season for
Yeah.
everything.
Oh
And
yeah.
I don't think those audiences go away altogether. They might, like you were kind of alluding to, like rock music might not necessarily be in the forefront of popular culture or dominating
Yeah.
popular culture the way
Yeah.
in which it has done. But that audience is so deep at this point,
Yeah.
and those songs and those bigger artists are so entrenched in sort of just who we are now anyway. Like it's never going away, right? And there's
Hmm.
always going to
Yeah.
be somebody else like me who 30 years after a record came out heard an album for the first time and it felt like it was recorded yesterday and it was brand new
Hmm.
to me and it changed my outlook and it changed yeah, it sounds ridiculous to say it out loud as a grown man, but it changed my life. Like I remember like how I felt about certain things before I listened to that record, and I remember what my tastes became as a result of like the path that took me down and stuff. And I think that'll keep happening, right? There's gonna be kids who, in whichever genre, whether it's country, whether it's rock music, whether it's pop music,
Mm.
hip hop, whatever, they're gonna keep going back to yeah to this wealth of music that's out there. Like it's happening
Yeah.
in hip hop already, right? Like hip hop has now been around for long enough that there is multiple generations of people who have grown up with the different incarnations
Yeah.
of that music, and rock music and country music is just a case of being 30 years ahead of that,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
that's all it is. There's just another 30 years of catalog in those genres. That's all it is.
Oh yeah. For sure. It's going to be really cool the next 10, 15, especially being so heavy in the industry like I am, like you are, even outside of being a musician,
Mhm.
it's going to be really cool to see kind of what weird cross subgenres start to come out.
I think so. Like, I think we're seeing it already. I mean, like, you can look at the sort of the crossover between pop music and country music in a couple of different ways. But the way I'm looking at it is that like this is a really great example of how genre really does not dictate in the
Hmm.
same way in which it used to dictate the market,
Yep.
right? People ultimately now, like, I mean, I'm in my mid 30s, right? And it's like
Hmm.
there is a good there's at least a generation, if not now two generations of people younger than me who have grown up with access to absolutely every song in the history of music at their
Yep.
fingertips.
Yep.
And the greatest part about that is that they've not grown up with all the taboos and the kind of the so-called gatekeeping and whatever that comes with, well, if you like this kind of music, then you're this kind of
Yep.
person. They've been able to make their own choices. And the same person who's listening to Slipknot can also go and listen to Post Malone and they can listen to Luke Combs. And do you know what I mean? Like wherever you want to, like, no, you can have whatever you want. You can have that
Yep.
most eclectic playlist in the world at your fingertips and in your earbuds, literally whenever you want it,
Yep.
when the
Yep.
mood strikes you, right?
Right. Most kids nowadays don't remember or don't know about the days back in the mid 90s, late 90s, early 2000s,
Yeah,
where you had to go to the store
yeah,
and buy an album because
Yep.
singles didn't exist,
Yep.
and you were going to pay, I don't know what it would have been in the UK, but like I think in the US it was like anywhere from 9 to 11 bucks to get a
Right.
CD. Um, and that's what you had, you know?
Yeah, that's it. Like, I mean, I grew up. I mean, initially, I've got this weird soft spot for cassettes, even though they're such a wasteful, inconvenient format or whatever, right? But I grew up buying, yeah, cassette
Mhm.
singles and albums, and then I think by the time I was probably about maybe about 7 or 8 years old, like we actually had we had a sort of a newfangled hi-fi which had a cassette deck, but it also had the CD deck as well. And I
Yeah.
remember being super excited about like just how great everything sounded like at that point, because it really was like a distinct step up from the kind of the hiss and the noise floor of the
Yeah.
cassettes. But yeah, the thing I must admit I do miss, and it is kind of crazy to think that that experience isn't necessarily as universal as it once was. But yeah, I do miss going to the store and flicking through stuff, and sometimes even getting to put on the headphones and be like, okay, am I going to buy this album or am I going to buy this one? Because I can afford to buy
Mhm.
one this week, so which one is it
Yeah.
going to be? And you'd
Right.
listen to 30 seconds or 40 seconds of something and be like, okay, well, I like the single that I heard on the radio or I saw on MTV, but I also
Mhm.
heard another song in the store, so do you know what I mean? Like it makes me a little bit sad that that's not there. But at the same time, though, like there is probably more independent record stores at this moment in time in
Mhm.
2024 than there was when I was growing up in yeah,
Yeah.
like I said, in the 90s in the UK. So on
Yeah.
that level, the experience isn't quite the same, but I think there is another version potentially of that out there for people.
Oh yeah.
And the fact that it's not big box stores as such anymore doing this, like it is independent mom and
Yeah.
pop kind of setups and stuff. Like I think the exciting part there is that you're more likely to end up participating like in your local music scene or your
Mhm.
community as a result of going to those
Yep.
independent stores instead of going to like Sam Goody or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
those kind of
Yeah.
places.
Yeah. Well, what I've seen recently is I've seen a few places doing this. Like there were mom and pop record shops. Like they're a record
Mhm.
shop, but then they also have like a stage set up. So they bring bands in on
Yeah.
Friday night, Thursday, you know, like
Yep.
whatever it is. And then they have like a coffee shop, or like they have like some kind of snack shop attached. So it's like
Yeah.
this multifaceted thing. And it's a cool place to hang out, especially if you're
It's
under
great. It's
21.
a destination location, right? Like as a
Yeah.
business model, it makes so much more sense
Hmm.
because instead of just being just strictly a transactional
Hmm.
store in a traditional sense, you're making that store like part of the community. It's becoming a hub, right?
Hmm.
I mean, I get to go out to Nashville a few times a year on average,
Yeah.
most normal years for work and stuff. And honestly, one of my favorite spots to go to, I love Grimey's over in East Nashville because
Hmm.
it's exactly that setup. There's a great coffee shop next door, but they've got this beautiful little stage and this surprisingly powerful PA system.
Yeah.
And there's always these great in-store performances. And it's kind of in my mind, it's what I almost want every record store to be when I walk into.
Yeah.
I was kind of very fortunate when I started coming out to California about 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I remember going to Amoeba and getting to see an in-store performance and stuff. And at that point, that kind of thing was pretty rare. Like it was like,
Yeah.
okay, this is a special thing that I've heard happens here, right? Whereas
Hmm.
now, like almost you throw a rock and there's a town in any given state which is doing that kind of thing, and that's really cool. Like
Yeah.
that's really special because I've always loved those kind of performances. I've always loved the idea of hearing artists do their thing in a slightly different arrangement or a slightly
Hmm.
more intimate setting, and those two things just go hand in hand. And I think if you're attaching that to the value that you're giving to an independent business, that's just it's a match made in heaven. Like it's a really cool thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's a lot of really smart people out there, and
There is.
I've
I'm not one of them, but there is. They're out there. I know
right.
they're out there.
It's like I wish there was a place. So I lived out in New Mexico before I moved here.
Mhm.
I lived in New Mexico for a few years, and there was a spot like that. They sold. I think they also, instead of they sold like records, and then they had like music supplies. It wasn't like you
Right?
go in
Yeah.
there and buy a guitar, but if you need like a
No.
pickup or like whatever it
Yeah, or
was,
strings, or somebody can
yeah,
probably fix your amp if it's broken or whatever. Yeah,
yeah,
I love those places. They're so
yeah.
good. Yeah.
And so we did some stuff there, and they had like a showcase in the back, and they do shows every
Mhm.
once in a while. And it's a really cool spot, except the owner shut it down because he was like, hey, it's just not doing it anymore. And I'm like, that's just so unfortunate because the scene
Yeah.
wasn't really supporting it. And
Yeah.
it's like, I get it, but
It's like all of this stuff, like it has to be a handshake, right? Like there
hmm
is I've got quite a lot of friends in Bakersfield, California,
hmm
and I've been fortunate enough to play there quite a bit. And there's a great store down there called Bakersfield Sound Company, and it's an
Okay.
independent music store. They're predominantly at face value like an instrument retailer,
hmm
but they have, by the nature of kind of their kind of community focused mentality, they've become this really incredible hub for just everything within that scene, right? Like
hmm
they host shows in store, but
Yes.
it's not just let's stick a band in the corner and whatever. Like everything is like beautifully lit and they film everything they do. Like their YouTube channel is definitely worth checking out if you get a chance,
Yes.
because like they literally do these pretty much like tiny desk NPR level kind of productions
hmm
for these great local artists, and it's just such a, I mean, I was at one a few nights ago. Some friends of mine were playing, and I was looking forward to catching them
hmm
and whatnot. And at the end of it, I was just like, man, this is. I've got complacent with the fact that I know this exists, and I'm like, I know this isn't true for everywhere,
Yeah.
and but it is a really special thing. You know,
Yeah.
every now and again when you're just like, wow, that was actually really, really cool, and
Yeah.
it happened in the way in which it did because these people did it and they really care about it, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's something that I think we can all kind of, yeah, all take something from. Like it's amazing how just like giving 10% more of a crap about
hmm
something than the next person, it's amazing. Like it's an exponential difference as far as what
Yes.
that can mean for a music scene on a local level.
hmm You just gave me an idea. So we've been trying to we oh, there goes Siri.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good. So last June or this past June, we went out. I went out to Nashville for CMA Fest, and
Yeah.
I'd been having this idea to do a live musical variety show, but
hmm
recorded as a podcast. So basically, it was me and a couple of guests. We'd sit there, chat, whatever. We'd bring a musician up. They'd play. Have you
Yeah.
ever seen the show Kill Tony?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
basically
super cool.
imagine that, but instead of comedians, musicians.
Yeah, honestly, I mean that sounds great. I mean that's I
Yeah,
love that kind of stuff. Honestly, like,
yeah,
I'm a sucker for radio sessions, right? Because you
yeah,
would get that interview and that conversation, and then you'd
yeah,
also get the performance, and yeah, and it's yeah. I think as a
yeah,
podcast that makes so much sense because you're
yeah,
not limited to the silly time frames that radio has to dictate. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right.
oh, the commercials come up in another
Yeah,
3 minutes, so
yeah. It's
yeah.
so we did that out and we did a show out in I did a show here in Texas and then I did a
hmm
show out in Nashville and I've been trying to think of ways to do it because restaurants are really hard to kind of sell on this idea, restaurants and bars. And
Yeah.
you just kind of gave me the idea of maybe I need to find these mom and pop record shops that bring
I think
in
that's it. Like
yeah,
record stores and yeah, and like mom and pop music stores,
yeah,
right? Like if
yeah,
you can find the cool ones, like that's exactly the kind of thing that they would, I'm sure, would love to partner on.
yeah,
Because yeah, that honestly, that yeah, like you said, like a restaurant's a tough sell, and so is a bar as well.
yeah,
Because when you're trying not to alienate your locals, and you're also yeah,
yeah,
whereas somewhere that is music focused, and that's the intention of those kind of spaces, like that makes total sense. Yeah,
yeah. You,
yeah.
I'm gonna have to reset my thought train and work on that one. So
No, 100%. Yeah, yeah. Keep me posted. I love the idea of that.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And
and
being able to go to different towns and do
yeah,
that, that's
oh
super
yeah,
cool, right?
yeah, because it's like next summer we were looking, my buddy and I were like, hey, let's like we'll both have fresh time off.
hmm
Let's find a 10-day run. Like let's put
Yeah.
together a 10-day
Do a
tour.
tour. Yeah.
It'd be great. I got a little baby PA and all the
Yeah.
gear and everything we need. And yeah,
Yeah, you find the right partners in the right cities for those things, and you guys are away because like
yeah.
that it's yeah, it's such a great idea. It honestly like the simple ideas are the best ideas, and
hmm
honestly, like you said, like great conversations and unique performances.
Yeah,
It I don't know, it's tried and true
yeah.
for a reason, right? Like
Oh
people
yeah,
enjoy
for
that
sure.
stuff. You look at the amount of views that those tiny desk shows get on
hmm
YouTube rather than the people actually tuning in to listen on the radio. And they're getting millions and millions of hits because if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? Like it's a cool
Yeah,
performance,
yeah,
it's a little bit of conversation. So yeah,
yeah,
I'm all
yeah,
for
yeah.
that kind of thing.
And we'll definitely keep you in the loop on that one because
Yeah, no, yeah, yeah. If you come out to the West Coast, or I happen to be wherever you're at during
yeah.
one of those dates,
Well,
yeah, I'd love to come out and see
it,
that with you
it's
guys.
it's one of those things where I have a lot of so when I was in New Mexico, I was in the film industry. I did a lot of film
Mhm.
stuff, and a lot of my friends moved out to the West Coast, and they're like, "Dude, you got to move out here." Like it's the place, and I'm like, I'm not really sold on the film industry anymore because like the last
Mm,
year that I was in it, I had like 4 or 5 film projects that I put a lot of sweat, time, energy, and all this stuff, and none of
yep.
them got released. And it
It's
was
tough.
like it was one of those things where it was a lot of friends saying, "Hey man, this is gonna be the like this is gonna be the one. We're gonna
Yeah,
do big things with this. I
yeah,
need your help." And it's like, of course, I'm gonna come
yeah,
help you. And then 6 months later, the film doesn't come out, and it's like,
yeah.
sweet,
It's tough. No, honestly,
yeah,
I work in the film industry, like on the provinces of
yeah,
that. Like I've shot key art over time,
yeah,
and I've got some really good friends who are literally like they are in various roles throughout that industry, and
yeah,
it's like the music business, right? Like it
mm,
really is a brutal and confusing and ever changing kind of animal, but yeah, it's honestly it is not for everybody in the
yeah,
sense of making it their day-to-day
yeah,
life. And sometimes you've got to draw a line and say, okay, I don't want this to ruin what I love about this
yeah,
end product, right? What I love about movies or what I love about music. And for me, that's kind of where I'm at. Like the music stuff is super fun and it's so special to me and it's so important to me. But honestly, if it starts not being that, then okay, that's where we have to like put this in a box and put it to one side. But I'm fortunate enough in that my day job and my world that I'm in actually is a pretty good bedfellow for this, as
yeah,
far as like I understand that world that I'm now coming into as an
yeah,
artist, right? I've got a level of context that I feel very lucky to have as a result of kind of grinding
yeah,
away in a totally different job in that same business for such a long time. So I'm trying to take everything I've learned along the way and everything I continue to sort of to try and understand and put together and to sort of try and let both of those things kind of inform each other and whatnot. And yeah, so far so good. So I'm
nice.
I'm I'm excited for what the next year has in store.
For sure. Speaking of the next, where are you kind of at right now? Are you already, obviously, this EP has only been out for a little less than a month, but are you already looking at the next project? Where are you kind of at on that?
Yeah, so this is the crazy thing. So because this one has taken a sort of a hot minute to actually put
Yeah.
together and then actually finally get out there and to figure out the distribution and stuff, like not that I've mentally moved on from these songs, but like I've written about 12 or so more finished songs since I
Nice.
finished the five that are on this record. So in my head I'm like I'm really excited to get back into the studio, and I think, to be honest, the way I'm going to do it moving forward, I'm definitely going to look at a string of singles
Mhm.
and then probably putting them out on another EP. To do this first EP the way I did tackle it, I couldn't settle on a single which I felt was going to represent who I was and who I was and the range of what I was trying to put out there. So, although a lot of people at this point might tell you, your Instagram marketing gurus might tell you that no, 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 you want to build an audience very slowly and song by song and whatever. But
Yeah.
I had this batch of songs, and although they were written over a period of time, and although it's not it is not a concept album in the sense that it is a story from beginning to end. There are some themes as far as traveling and moving on in life, which kind of run throughout these five songs, and
Yeah.
they just made such an obvious combination in my mind. It was weird to be like, okay, so what's the single and what's the thing that people are just gonna the one song that people are gonna key in on and associate
Yeah.
with me, and I really couldn't choose one. So for better or for worse, I said, look, these five in my head live together. They're brother and sister. They have to be together.
Mm.
So, but now I've kind of freed myself of those shackles, and I've set the table. And if somebody wants to go and look me up, they can find this kind of buffet of stuff to choose from. But now this means I can think kind of, okay, let's do a run of singles and then release another EP at the end of that run with all of these songs on it, right? Or an album
Yeah.
even at that
Yeah.
point. But yeah, so I am excited. I mean, the current sort of promo schedule I'm on takes me through till pretty much the end of January. So I think it's probably going to be, yeah, it's going to be at least sort of late January, early February before I'm even
Mhm.
thinking about like definitively, okay, what is going to be the next single at this point.
Right.
So I'm trying to still enjoy this phase of it, because
Yeah.
yes, it's hard work, and honestly, a few years ago I couldn't have imagined doing this many spreadsheets in
Yeah.
relation to my music.
Fair. Very fair.
but but you've got to keep, I know for me, I've got to keep myself on track, right? And I've got to keep myself accountable, and I'm very much a list oriented person. I
Hmm.
like being able to tick things off. So I'm trying to still take some pleasure in this. Like I'm fortunate in a lot of ways, because I'm a photographer by trade,
Hmm.
and I direct motion as well for different clients. It's coming to a world of, I hate the word content, but it is, that's what people call it, right? Coming to a world of content-based marketing. I've got this slight, I've got this, not an advantage, but I definitely have a
Hmm.
perspective, and I have a lot of opinions about what that should look and feel like. So I'm still trying to take some pleasure in producing the reels and producing the imagery that we're
Yeah.
using to try and promote this record. And it's been a lot of fun. There's still a ton of cool stuff that's in the hopper, which is going to be appearing all over my socials in the next couple of months
Nice.
and stuff. And it's like I said, I'm choosing to sort of just to try and slow down enough to sort of just enjoy the great feedback that I've had so far, and
Nice.
kind people like you who've been willing to sit down for a little bit and to talk about this record with me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's been really cool to kind of sit down and get to digest the music and then get to
Mhm.
know you.
Yeah,
And, I'm really excited to kind of see where things go moving
me
forward.
too.
Obviously, it's one of those journeys where I don't think a lot of musicians kind of put it in this perspective, but it's like it's a journey that you and the listener get to kind of go on together, especially when you're on the up climb and you're climbing towards your goal or whatever it
Right.
is.
Yeah.
And it's like that's a joint journey. You're in this together, like at the end of the day. So
Yeah, no, 100%. And honestly, like I've been blown away by the kindness of how this has been received so far.
mhm.
Like I jokingly said to my wife, I was like, if five people listen to this and get a kick out of this, then honestly, that's cool with me. Like I had
Yeah.
zero expectations. But yeah, I started posting the content around it even in the run up to it, and I started to get this feeling in my stomach. I was like, maybe this is something, right? It's like
Right.
kind of like the excitement was genuine and it was sincere, and I'm certainly not doing crazy numbers like anybody
Hmm.
else's, but in a kind of a qualitative, not quantitative sense, like
Hmm.
I'm really, really pleased with how this is being received. And I don't have I this is the thing, like I don't have any real, even though I'm taking this very seriously and
Hmm.
I'm trying to give this its due diligence. Like I don't, in a year from now, I don't want to look back and be like, ah man, I really wish I'd promoted that debut record a little bit better or a little bit more consistently, or I wish I'd tried this or whatever. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I'm not setting myself up with a bunch of expectations or a bunch of number oriented goals
Yeah.
that I'm going to live or die by, as far as sort of whether I perceive this as being a successful or not.
Yeah.
So I think on that basis, like I'm very realistic, as in I've seen for 10 years what this artist journey looks like for people all the way from sprinter vans all the way through to private jets, right? Like I've
Yeah.
I've 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 seen the entire cross section of that, and I've been very
Right.
lucky to be a fly on the wall in that world. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to utilize that knowledge and sort of temper those expectations, and at the same time try and make the most of the sort of the knowledge and the insights that I do have. And honestly, like I'm having a lot of fun playing these songs live, and now the record is out, it's actually really nice to have people by name kind of come up to me afterwards and say, oh, the Santorana Wins, I love that, or the 99, or I was listening to this song in the car with my kid and they love that crazy dobro sound on Devil on Her
Yeah.
Back or whatever. And that is what means the world to me at this point. And it's not just out of a vanity thing. It's just like I've been so desperate to finally share this. Like this has been 4 years in the works. And to be at a point where like, yeah, people are actually hearing these songs now, it's just super special, and I really hope that I get to continue to share this with people, and that people are intrigued enough to kind of to continue to follow and to see what comes next.
Yeah.
Because the next batch of songs are pretty cool, if I say so
Yes.
myself. There's a lot of them I really like, and some of it's maybe that artist thing of like, oh, my most recent thing is my favorite thing, but no, genuinely, like it's, if
Yeah.
you liked or were at least intrigued by what I've shown you so far, like the trajectory is pretty interesting as far as what some of these songs start to sound like. So
Oh yeah,
so
nice.
yeah.
And you're really in, before we kind of start wrapping this up and whatnot. You're
Yeah.
in a really cool spot to, you've had a pretty long runway and a lot of exposure to the industry to kind of
Yeah.
have an opportunity to discover who you wanted to be as a musician.
No, definitely. I've said this to a few people. I was talking to a friend the other day who I hadn't actually caught up with in about a year or so,
Mhm.
and they knew that I was working on this, but it kind of it was one of those kind of jokes between us that like this record was never gonna, it was Schrodinger's EP, right? Like it was it
Right.
existed and it didn't exist because nobody was able to listen to it yet. But I was no, I was saying to him that like I don't think if I'd have put this record out in 2019, I
Yeah.
wouldn't have made the record that I just made. And
Yeah.
I can't imagine not having these songs now, and I can't imagine those not being part
Right.
of who I am. And because I mean, even when I'm writing in a narrative sense, there's still a lot of me in there. It's still very much
Mhm.
framed through my worldview and stuff, and there's a lot of personal stuff in there. There's some stories that are true stories or stories based on
Yeah.
things that have happened in my life, but even the ones that are more character driven, it's still, there's still a lot of me in there. So it's, yeah, it is weird to think, okay, yeah, what would this record have sounded like 10 years ago or 15 years ago? It really wouldn't have sounded like this. So I'm really
Yeah.
grateful to be at the spot that I'm at, both musically as far as where my taste is at, where my playing is at, even. Because I mean, yeah, like again, it's that thing of like, yeah, I can't even begin to imagine what it would have sounded like prior to this. So I'm super grateful for that, and I'm trying to be very I'm just trying to be aware, and I'm trying to be, yeah, just grateful along the way, really, as far as sort of just enjoying each step of this. But no, I couldn't imagine, as somebody who didn't have the broader context that
Yeah.
I'm lucky to have. I can't imagine how daunting or how confusing so much of this could be to somebody, right? Like
Yeah.
it's even just the process of actually just putting out a record in itself, right? Even just squaring away publishing and distribution. And I've had some really great friends sort of hold my hand all the way through that process. Because even though I've heard of ASCAP and I've heard of BMI
Yeah.
and all this other stuff, right? To have somebody, to hold my hand and kind of get me through that and get me to the
Yeah.
point where, okay, yeah, my music's out there on the streamers and you can go find it. It's,
Right.
yeah, it's a
And,
huge task.
right. And hearing of ASCAP, BMI, like all these legal things that you have to
Yeah,
do is one thing, and like knowing they exist, but then getting yourself into the position to be
yeah,
like, okay, fill this out, and it's got to be like
yeah.
precise and all these things, and it's a whole different
When
animal.
you start handing over your social security number, you're like, oh shit, I guess this is getting quite real.
Right? 100%, 100%.
For all that
But
money I'm not gonna make from streaming, yeah.
fair, fair, very. um, but I've really enjoyed the conversation with you. We'll have to sit down and do this again at some
Yeah,
point.
likewise. This has been really fun. Thank you so much for, yeah, for taking the time and listening to a record as well. Like I
Yeah,
appreciate that as well as having the chat. But
yeah,
yeah, I hope we can do this again. Or I'd even love to, yeah, love to play one of your showcases at some
yeah.
point when you
W-
come to a town near me.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely keep you in the loop on that one. If anybody wants to check out your socials, any of that fun stuff, where's the best place to find you?
So yeah, so probably Instagram as far as the social side of things. That's my main kind of jumping off point. So I am at Ben Went West. So BenWentWest.
Hmm.
Yeah. And likewise,
Awesome.
that's the name of the record, and that's the project name, the artist name as well. So I tried to keep that as streamlined as possible. So if you look that up, you are gonna find this record whether you want to or
Fair.
not.
Very fair. And anybody that's listening, we'll have the link to Ben Went West down in the description, the Spotify link, all that fun stuff. So you can easily click it now if you would like to. But
Sweet.
that
Thank
being,
you so much.
yeah, absolutely. But once again, thank you all so very much for joining us, Ben. Really appreciate your time, and we will catch y'all later.